I was muted, sorry. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending where you are calling from. My name is Marina, and it is a pleasure being with you all here today. Today, we will host the fourth and last Ocean Dialogue hosted by Sustainable Ocean Alliance Brazil. Yeah, thank you. Hosted by Sustainable Ocean Alliance Brazil. And the fourth panel that is today, we will be talking about deep sea mining. And this event is organized in collaboration with Sustainable Ocean Alliance Brazil and Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, alongside the fellowship program of Ocean Voices from the Nippon Foundation and University of Edinburgh. So thank you all for being here with us today. I think we can pass to more slides. Yeah, so that's our event today. And the next one, please. So giving you a little bit of context for this, this meeting. So the Brazilian presidency of G20 this year created what's called Oceans 20 or O20. That is a civil society engagement group about oceans that is coordinated by the UNESCO Chair for Ocean Sustainability in collaboration with the UN Global Compact, the World Economic Forum, the Brazilian Fund for Biodiversity, FUNBio, and the National Institute of Ocean Research, INPO. So yeah, we can go one more, please. So the G20 has three main priority areas, so social inclusion and fight against hunger and poverty, energy transitions and fight against climate change, and the reform of global governance institutions. So building on these three pillars, it comes the Ocean 20 priorities. Next one, please. That is a fivefold, so it also focuses on climate change, climate action. It has a pillar on social equity and justice, health and conservation of ecosystems and biodiversity, scientific innovation and development, and also a governance pillar. And below those 5 pillars, we have 10 points of actions. And the idea today is that we will together discuss how deep seabed mining plays an important role here. So next one, please. So we are part of Sustainable Ocean Alliance Brazil, and we're very happy to bring youth voices to the discussions. The hub in Brazil is part of this big Sustainable Ocean Alliance network that is the largest network of youth ocean leaders worldwide, with more than 7,000 youth spread around more than 150 countries. And our main objective is to protect and restore our ocean. In our generation, we believe this is possible, and we strongly believe as well in the power of everyone that is here today to enact positive change. So with that, I would like to introduce a few of our speakers, and the way I'll do it is I'll introduce the speaker and ask a question, and then we'll go one by one. If you have any further questions, just please let us know in the Q&A. So the first one will be Kyle. So hello, Kyle. Kyle is from Barbados, and he is a Master's of Philosophy student in Deep Sea Biology at the University of West Indies. He's also an environmental journalist and highlights various issues that affect the natural world, deep seabed mining being one of them. Kyle was also part of the Sustainable Ocean Alliance delegation and the International Seabed Authorities ISA meetings last month in Jamaica, together with Daniel, that will also be in the panel with us. So welcome, Kyle. And I think my first question to you is, you mentioned before that the fact that deep seabed mining is poorly researched prompted you to learn more about it. So could you tell us a little bit about what have you learned so far in your studies and in terms of environmental impact of deep seabed mining, in the importance of governments taking a stance at these discussions at ISA?
Yeah, so hi, Marina, and hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me clearly. You can hear me well? Okay, great. So yes, so I'm studying deep sea biology, and I think one of the main things that I've learned is just our perception of the deep sea is quite different from reality. You know, people tend to think that it's a barren desert down there, you know, not much life. But the truth of the matter is that there's so much biodiversity so much life to be discovered. So the deep sea, just for like a bit of context, is described as the ocean that is like 200 meters and deeper. And there are a whole host of ecosystems down there. While getting into deep sea mining, I think firstly, I want to, set the background. Like, why are we even considering mining the deep sea, and what like even is down there to be mined? Because I don't know how much background knowledge people have on this, so I'll just set the scene basically.
That's great. Thank you.
But basically, as humanity moves towards a greener future, we want to be less dependent on fossil fuels. The need for metals such as cobalt, nickel, and copper, among others, but those are like the main three. Eyes are turning to the deep sea to get these metals because terrestrial resources are depleting, and these metals can be found in abundance in the deep sea. So they can be found in like three main sources. First, you have polymetallic sulfides, which are found on hydrothermal vents. Then there are cobalt-rich crusts on seamounts, basically mountains under the sea. And then we also have polymetallic nodules, which can be found on abyssal plains. So these are like potato-sized clumps of metal that have metals that have like precipitated on them. So like they have like a nucleus, so like either a sharp tooth or a piece of rock or a piece of debris that have allowed these metals to like form onto them over like millions and millions of years. So they're found most abundantly, well, the polymetallic nodules are the ones that are most sought after. And these are found most abundantly in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. So the Clarion-Clipperton zone is found in international waters and is between Mexico and Hawaii. And just for like a bit of like scale, essentially this area is the length of the United States of America. So if you look on the map, you can see just how large that area is. So yes, so these are the metals in question. And one of the let's start with the impacts. They're like direct impacts of mining. So first things first, the impacts on the ecosystems, because these hydrothermal vents and seamounts and the polymetallic nodules themselves, they are ecosystems and they host various organisms. So even just going and like plucking up these nodules from the seafloor, you're causing disturbance to these ecosystems. The deep sea is also dark. It's quiet. And the technology that's needed to be able to mine these areas would introduce light. It'll be quite noisy. And these are circumstances that deep sea life are just not used to. And then there are also the types of machines that are going to be used. The machine that is proposed to be used for mining essentially will just like scoop up these polymetallic nodules in large swaths, causing great disturbance on the seafloor. The thing about deep sea ecosystems is that they're slow growing and they tend not to recover from any types of disturbance. There are plenty of studies that show that areas that have been used for like test mining haven't recovered in like over more than 10 years. So that just goes to show that these resources are very finite. They're not going to replenish on a human time scale. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, these nodules they grow like about a couple millimeters per million years. So you can just imagine we're not going to be alive to see even the new development of one polymetallic nodule. So that just goes to show how long these resources take to grow. And there's honestly no way that they can recover from any sort of disturbance, at least on a human time scale. Then the machines are also going to be used. So I mentioned the collector machine, but then there's also the vessel that's going to be getting all of the nodules. Basically, they're going to be like shot up a pipeline up to the vessel, and they're going to be sedimentation plumes, first from the collector machine and then from the dewatering process from the vessel that's on the surface that's collecting the nodules. And because deep sea organisms are, for the most part, sessile, they don't move around a lot. And this area is usually clear of sediment. The sediment that's raining down on them from the machines that are being used are also going to cause issues for them in feeding or carrying out other parts of their life. So those are some of the direct impacts that deep sea ecosystems can expect to face in the mining process. But then there are also further reaching impacts, things that are a bit less direct. But so I mentioned the disturbance of the marine sediments as the machines move across the seafloor. And marine sediments are also, what's the word I'm looking for? They tend to, sorry, I should just say, hi. Sorry. But marine sediments are important for carbon sequestration. They act as a good carbon store for our Earth. And disturbing these sediments will disrupt the natural processes of the ocean. The ocean transports carbon from the surface to the seafloor. And as the mining process happens, that will essentially disrupt the ocean's ability to regulate our climate. And then other activities could also impact the migration of fish, migration and distribution, and plenty of small and developing states depend on fisheries for income for their countries, for sustenance. So those other areas will also be greatly impacted. And the truth is, we don't have enough scientific information on the deep sea to even fully consider the full impacts that this activity can have. I mean, we've already jumped into an activity with climate change that we are dealing with. Small and developing states, developing countries contribute a negligible amount of greenhouse gas emissions globally. But yeah, we're on the front lines experiencing these things. And we don't want to jump into another activity without knowing the full implications that can follow. So we really need to conduct enough scientific research to be sure that we are fully informed that deep sea mining will not negatively impact us, or see if there's a sustainable way that this could possibly be done. But yes, I think my main message is that more scientific research needs to happen. And because of these impacts that I've noted, it's extremely important for governments to be present at these meetings that are happening at the International Seabed Authority because of the global implications in terms of fishing and our climate. We don't want to contribute more to the climate crisis. And as I said, developing nations and small and developing states will most likely face these impacts, or at least have them a lot more difficultly than global North countries. So it's important that we are there to lend our voice towards these discussions. And the other thing is that these marine minerals are said to be, part of our common heritage of all mankind. So by that fact, we should be there. We should all be there having these discussions as to what happens with these resources. So that's why it's important for governments to have a stance. We don't want to, sit on the sidelines, and then when something happens, we're like, oh, we should have been there. So it's important to get the word out, because there are plenty of countries that are still not represented at these ISA meetings. Yes, there are financial constraints for some countries, but the other thing is that deep sea mining is just not on the radar for a lot of nations. But I guess I'll let Mela or Daniel speak more about the International Seabed Authority so that people can get more of a background on on what they do. But yeah, I think I'll start rambling now and allow other people to speak. But thank you, Marina, for letting me talk for a bit.
Of course, thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge with us. It has been really, really nice. And it's just, as you said, it's such a new science, or at least for the majority of people that haven't really heard about deep seabed mining before. And even all the challenges, science is still trying to figure out everything that is involved. So it's really crazy to think that we'll be moving on to destroy something we don't even understand. And I guess that's one of the things we are trying to prevent. And I have so many other questions, but I guess we'll go back to it. Because now I would like to introduce Myla. Myla is a Brazilian, but currently based in Germany. She holds a PhD in oceanography from the University of São Paulo and is currently a part-time fellow from the Nippon Foundation, University of Edinburgh Ocean Voices Program, a research associate at the Research Institute for Sustainability at the Helmholtz Center of Potsdam, and is a member of the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative Steering Committee. So welcome, Myla. It is such a pleasure having you here with us. And as one of your key focuses is exactly on the science to policy interface, right? And how can we have good practices for ocean governance? So focusing on the deep seabed mining topic, could you tell us a little bit how these International Seabed Authority meetings are organized and what are the main challenges to achieve an adequate ecosystem-based management?
Thank you so much for the introduction, Marina, and thank you so much to you, Amanda, Nayana, and all who made possible for me to be here today. It's a great pleasure to have the possibility to share a little bit of what I know or of the experience I've gathered throughout my career into this topic, which is such a, I would say, has been gaining so much attention in the last years, I would say, which is deep sea mining. So I will start very briefly contextualizing the creation of the International Seabed Authority, the main organs that take part in this institution, and also what are the functions of each one of these organs, and then through them I'm gonna slowly, smoothly start speaking a little bit more about the governance issues or about why having an ecosystem-based management within the ISA regime would be so important in order to make sure that if these activities really start to happen, they are done in the best way possible, or the most sustainable way possible, if this is even possible. So just for a very brief context of where the ISA comes from. So basically we have the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is basically called very generally as the Constitutions of the Seas. It has been established in 1982. And basically the idea or the objective of the UNCLOS is to regulate activities in the marine realm and establish rules and the limitations of maritime zones. Of course, here we have a special focus in areas that don't belong with the territory of any countries. So as part of the implementation agreement that was set in 1994, the international, as part of UNCLOS, right, is an agreement, an implementation agreement, part of UNCLOS. The International Seabed Authority was formally active. It was formally starting its activities. So the International Seabed Authority was created under the realm of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So if someone is really interested in understanding exactly what are the objectives of the ISA, what are the main organs and the very specific functions of each one of them, this is all contained in the UNCLOS convention. So just a few highlights of articles within UNCLOS that can be very important and we should bear in mind whenever speaking about the International Seabed Authority. I would like to highlight, I promise I won't focus too much in numbers and articles and things like that, but I think these are very important drivers to our conversation. So we have article, for example, 140, which establishes that the activities in the area shall be carried for the benefit of mankind as a whole, as Kyle just mentioned as well. So basically the resources that occur in the area, and the area here is named the seafloor beyond national jurisdictions, the minerals that are in these areas are considered the common heritage of humankind, and therefore they don't belong to anyone specifically, but rather it belongs to all of us as humankind and to the current generations and the future generations. And therefore there should be a special regime to manage the regulations or extractions of such minerals. And that's one of the objectives of the ISA. So for that, according to Article 145, the authority should also adopt appropriate rules, regulations, and procedures to ensure the protection of the environment. So basically, is also part of the ISA work, not only to establish the rules and regulations and really manage the whole deep sea mining regime, but also that within that it needs to ensure the protection of the marine environment. Moving forward a little bit on the context, the International Seabed Authority comprises the signatory parties of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which includes 167 member states, plus the European Union. And whenever we are talking about who is taking decisions at the ISA or who actually has a say within the ISA, we are talking about member states. So people on their personal capacities cannot really have a vote or a say within what happens in the deep sea mining regime, but rather member states, for example, Brazil, for example, Barbados or Mexico and so on, these are the representatives of humankind taking the decisions there for us. So however, there is a small organization within these member states. Not necessarily all of them displayed the very same activities, I would say. The ISA is actually divided in the Assembly, the Council, the Legal and Technical Commission, and the Secretariat. So these are the four organs which are actually active at this moment in the negotiations of the ISA. So basically the Assembly is called the supreme organ and consists of all member states of UNCLOS. So basically these 167 plus the European Union have a seat at the Assembly and are therefore Assembly members. And there is the Council, which is a group of member states, actually more specifically 36 members elected by the Assembly, or basically elected by everyone else according to a regime of chambers established by UNCLOS. I won't get into details here, but basically each one of these chambers represent a special group of interests or countries with interests, different interests in relation to the mining industry, and they are organized in these chambers. The council is actually, I would say, the more vocal, as it says, the executive body, which is responsible for very important decisions on the ISA, for example, in relation to the application of a plan of work, or even in relation to the approval of an environmental impact statement, and so on. And just to add to that, the Assembly needs to also approve the decision of the Council. But in terms of really, let's say, the power in practice, this is within the Council. The Legal and Technical Commission is a subsidiary organ of the Council and is responsible to formulate the rules, regulations, and procedures and provide recommendations for the Council. So there is a little bit of a scale of hierarchy of approval within the ISA. But basically, or in other words, as the name really said, it's more like a technical body composed of members appointed by the council and representatives of member states who have specifically in expertises of interest for the discussion of deep sea mining. So we are here talking about perhaps geologists, biologists, legal experts, economists, and so on. So basically, these are the technical really body of the ISA that would look with this technical view to documents that are submitted, for example, for by contractors, or that will decide from a technical and legal point of view how these rules and regulations should look like. And finally, the Secretariat is the administrative organ of the ISA and is responsible for supporting the Council and the Assembly on their requests and administer the day-to-day functions of the ISA. So currently, since the ISA entered in force, 31 contracts of exploration have been issued by the ISA. Most of them, as Kyle was also mentioning, is for polymetallic nodules, which are these potato-shaped structures that occur in abyssal plains. And most of these contracts have been issued to the Clarion Clipper zone, which is this fracture zone mentioned by Kyle that occurs between Mexico and Hawaii. So basically, the main interest in deep sea mining is actually there at the moment. And also, as the biggest interest is there in relation to the other ecosystems, such as seamounts and hydrothermal vents. This is perhaps, the abyssal plains is perhaps the ecosystem that we have a little bit more of knowledge because of this interest. So in terms of how hydrothermal vents, especially the inactive hydrothermal vents, how these work, what are the structure, functions, and services provided by these ecosystems, we know very little at the moment. It's really important to say that the discussions and everything that we are talking here right now in terms of deep sea mining is on, let's say, exploratory basis. So basically, we don't have currently deep sea mining activities happening in a big scale, commercial scale in the area or in the areas beyond national jurisdiction. So what we have so far is these 31 contracts that have been issued for exploratory purposes, which means basically conducting viability studies in terms of technology, economy, environmental, and so on, right? So basically, we don't have yet deep sea mining happening, especially because the current draft for exploitation regulations, and here exploitation really means this commercial extraction of these minerals, is not, it doesn't have a consensus on how these rules and regulations should look like. So this is exactly what has been debated and has been discussed at the ISA, especially in the past few years. And while we, ideally, while we don't have this mining code, as they are calling, or exploitation rules and regulations ready, mining in a commercial scale should not start. But the whole concern around deep sea mining activities, as Kyle pointed out so well, is related to a great potential of causing irreversible damage to the marine environment, and therefore, for example, affecting us directly in action-reaction loop, I would say. So basically, if you disturb the deep sea and you basically change the way the structure and functions happen, or basically, in other words, how the organisms interact or in their food chain and so on, this might backfire at us through the compromise of an ecosystem service that is really important to us. So for example, if because of deep sea mining, you have fisheries, you can cause a damage into fishery stocks in a determined area, and so on. This might, as Kyle was saying, really affect directly a community or a group of people who are hugely dependent on fishing for their life and well-being. So it's really important to keep in mind that whenever we are talking about deep sea mining, we are not, or actually any other human interaction in the environment, we are not only speaking about, this gonna damage this ecosystem that occurs very far from us. We don't even know how it looks like. I've never seen it, but we need to bear in mind that this is part of a thing that is working as part of a system. And if you damage a part of this system, that's for sure gonna cause impacts in other parts of the system. What we need to have in mind is, are we willing to bear these impacts? And also more than that, what these impacts could look like, because we don't know so many things. We actually don't know how we can be impacted by it, which brings a lot of doubts and questions in relation to if and how move forward discussing deep sea mining. So as Kyle mentioned, there is the direct damage to biodiversity, the sediment plumes, which can extend for hundreds of kilometers in the deep ocean and compromise ecosystems that are very far from the source of impact, noise, light, vibration, but also I would like to bring a little bit more of detail here, perhaps, or attention into the importance of considering cumulative impacts. So basically, how having a 24/7 deep sea mining activity taking place in a certain area of the ocean, creating sediment plumes, noise, vibration, light, and how would that actually interact with other uses that are happening at the same time, or with the direct or indirect impact of other uses? We have no idea about that yet. So this is something that we definitely need to bear in mind, how these impacts would combine with each other and what this would cause. And finally, we also have this kind of pressure that is invisible but is not invisible, which is climate change. We are just starting to understand how climate change is actually changing dynamics in the marine environment. And this, in combination with deep sea mining, for example, in terms of changes in ecosystems, changing in minimum zones of oxygen minimum zones in the ocean. This is all gonna change, and for sure that has an implication for deep sea ecosystems. Therefore, this needs to be taken in consideration very carefully. And that's why it's so important that we do not rush these discussions and do not rush to have deep sea mining actually happening in practice. There, as Kyle said, that is a lot of things that we don't know. And moving away a little bit from the so-called ecological impacts of deep sea mining, there are also the social impacts and economic impacts of deep sea mining. As we were mentioning, deep sea mining is supposed to happen for the benefit of humankind as a whole. But in practice, once this is in place, who are truly gonna be the beneficiaries of deep sea mining? How the royalties of deep sea mining would be divided? How would that actually take place? How this balance between countries who have have great industries of mining already happening, land mining happening, how would that be balanced or counterbalanced with mining activities taking place in the deep sea? Also, one of the narratives that especially contractors or those with interest in having deep sea mining actually happening is that deep sea mining might, diminish, or it might decrease social pressures and child labor or labor in very bad conditions and things like that, because basically the idea is that once you have deep sea mining, land mining would kind of slowly decrease, but it's as good colleagues of mine said, and I totally agree with them, is that once you have deep sea mining happening, you're just adding one more competition into the market, which might actually exacerbate the very bad conditions in which land mining take place at the moment. So we need to be very careful with the narratives and how the really need for this green transition is being kind of sold to us. And I guess more than that, I think people outside of our bubble of deep sea mining or, you know, as a society need to understand what is actually at stake and what is kind of trying to be sold to us. And more than that, what are geopolitical implications of deep sea mining, right? So it's not only about speaking of the environment, but the whole balance, geopolitical balance, social balance, and economic balance would be impacted. What we need to have a better idea, it is if we are happy with how this is going to be affected. And then finally, I'm really sorry, I spoke too much about this part, but how is that connected to the adoption of ecosystem-based management? So just very briefly, ecosystem-based management is an integrated approach to management that considers the entire ecosystem, including humans. And the way I interpreted that is that whenever we are talking about including humans, we are including humans, their activities, but humans as also individuals within an ecosystem who have a voice, who has values, and who has an opinion, right? Or a say within a process. So basically the goal of ecosystem-based management is to maintain ecosystem in a healthy, productive, and resilient condition. So we keep providing ecosystem services, but also ecosystem-based management moves away from this one sector sort of approach, and instead it ensures that other sectors and other activities are also considered within a certain context, which is, for example, as we were discussing about the cumulative impacts, this is actually very important because it looks for beyond, let's say, what deep sea mining could cause as impact, but rather thinking about that in combination with other activities that are also happening. And ecosystem-based management also has this important component of considering social, economic, institutional perspectives, recognizing that all of that is intrinsically interdependent. So now looking into how EBM is within the deep sea mining regime, I have a few reflections that I would like to bring. So EBM is in general can be considered as a sort of best practice for governance and management of marine environments. And within the context of the ISA, what I found during my studies as part of my PhD is that EBM or ecosystem approach, these names can be used interchangeably, is a fundamental principle, or it is foreseen as a fundamental principle of the exploitation regulation draft, which is currently being discussed, but the regime does not clarify what EBM is in theory, neither what it should look like in practice within the ISA regime. So looking into the first rules and regulations produced by the ISA to what has been discussed now, you can see that EBM elements, because EBM is a logic that in order to turn that into more palpable approach has been divided into principles or conditions that are in conformity with EBM. So throughout time, looking at the first regulations of the ISA, you can see that these principles are a little bit more reflected throughout time. However, this is not yet enough. And also, I looked into a little bit more of detail into the process of environment impact assessment within the ISA, both for exploration and what is foreseen for exploitation. And I can say that there is like a lot of flawless if we are putting that into comparison to what EBM principles are. So we have issues with public consultation, with transparency, with the consideration of cumulative impacts, acknowledgement of uncertainties, the use of knowledge and what kind of knowledge would EIA be based on. And here EBM would be looking into not only scientific knowledge, but also other types, including traditional knowledge. And that there is an important focus right now that the so-called standards and guidelines that are basically additional meat to the bone of what a environment impact statement should look like, they are being developed right now. And that's really important that we can insert more robust requirements within standards and guidelines to make sure that all of these flaws that I just mentioned are covered, and that environment impact assessment processes can be closest to good practice as possible. There is also another management instrument within the ISA that is called the Regional Environmental Management Plans. And these are basically management instrument in which you create some no mining zones where basically that cannot receive direct or indirect impacts of deep sea mining. And this is actually happening in the context of the CCZ. We have, I believe, 9 APIs or areas of particular environmental interest that would be comparable to marine protected areas, even though don't quote me on that. But it's basically these no mining areas where it cannot be impacted at all. But the process of establishing such REMPs, or regional environmental management plans, is also full of flaws, and that there is a lack of standardized procedures. So these REMPs are also foreseen for other areas of the ocean where there is contracts for exploration, and there is no like a step-by-step process to ensure that whatever has been done here at the CCZ is also going to be the same for the Mid-Atlantic region and so on. So basically here, again, flawless include the account for robust acknowledgement, the assessment or inclusion of cumulative impacts. And in this case, this is even more important because we're talking about huge regions. As Caio just said, the CCZ can be compared in terms of length to the United States, so the huge areas, but also the acknowledgement and management of knowledge uncertainties. This must be part of the REMP process in order to first start to think if that's going to be effective or not. I'm really moving towards the end now, I promise. And I guess one last step that one last thing I would like to bring is that within the ISA, the different stakeholders, so basically assembly, council, even observers who do not have a vote, but they do have a say that they bring in these discussions. They have different views of what ecosystem-based management entails for the process, which might, of course, have an impact in ensuring that this approach is effectively reflected in the rules, regulations, and practices. Therefore, here is extremely important that the ISA kind of collaborate with other organizations and entities with experience in the topic of EBM already to kind of have learnings and see what can actually be transported to the ISA regime. There is to be a consensus on the ISA context of what EBM entails for the process and what that would mean in practice. And finally, lots of people say that they don't really understand what EBM is, or that EBM can be quite complex and sort of wicked problem or something that is not achieved really, right? So it's important to bring some familiarization to the topic, and that can be done through workshops, policy briefs, side events, or as something that as we are doing here today, where we have the opportunity to reunite people and speak about a topic. Yeah, so that's my my contribution so far in relation to the EBM and the ISA. I hope that was clear, and I'm happy to provide any clarifications as needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Myla. This was super informative and super interesting as well, as it highlights so much how complex this topic is and the problem that we have at hand, because it's not only a social problem, it's a social problem, it's an environmental problem. We have lack of knowledge of what's going on, and also lack of understandings of what each thing is and how it should be. So, and then we are trying to create regulations in the middle of this, and hope that they are well decided. So yeah, thank you. I think it's definitely quite a big chunk we have to try to sort out. And on that note, I would like to introduce Daniel, that it was also on the spot at the last ISA meeting, seeing all this complexity in the discussions in real life. So Daniel Cáceres is from Peru. He's a marine biologist and the Hispano-America representative for SOA, Sustainable Ocean Alliance. Daniel is a Congress advisor and PADI dive instructor. He's also part of communities like Darwin 200, member of Explorers Club, and a Peace Boat ambassador. And Daniel was the head of delegation of Sustainable Ocean Alliance at the last ISA meeting. So bringing exactly the youth voices and the civil society to these discussions. So welcome, Daniel. It's truly a pleasure to have you here with us. And my question to you is, after following a few of these ISA meetings for a few rounds now, how do you see the change and the evolution in performance of countries, and mainly Latin countries, and what are still the key steps ahead there?
Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Myla and Kyle. I mean, it was great listening to both of you beforehand. I was with Kyle. Kyle was part of our SOA delegation currently, and it'll be great. Hopefully, the next time we can have some people from the Lusofonia region also be part of the SOA delegations, because I think you guys have a lot to bring to the table in the negotiation specifically. Well, this was my 7th time at the ISA. There was I was at the council meeting and the assembly in this part over here. It was 3 weeks of full negotiation and observation, because as Myla mentioned, we are observers. We're the first youth-based ocean organization observers. And the change in this past 7 sessions has been great. I mean, it has been like, at first, the first time I remember when we went to the assembly 2 years ago, I remember Salvador, which was the Chilean advisor to the Chilean delegation. He would come to, I mean, it was Chile and Costa Rica. We were bringing the subject of precautionary approach, evidence-based management, like Myla mentioned, and like how should we talk about like taking care of the marine environment? And back then it was just Chile and Costa Rica bringing it up constantly. And I remember Salvador telling me, he's like, we should not be saying the word moratorium. Moratorium is not under UNCLOS. So we cannot be using the word moratorium because it's not a legal word under UNCLOS. So that word should not be used. And now 2 years later, there are 32 countries calling on for a moratorium or precautionary pause, because last year Pew did an independent consultation, and actually under Article 145 that talks about the protection of the marine environment, not only is a moratorium a legal word to be discussed, but actually it should be seen as an obligation in case protection of the marine environment cannot be guaranteed. So I think that is very, very strong solution that came about, because many people would say like, oh, we cannot say moratorium because it's not under UNCLOS. But no, we know that moratorium is actually an obligation under Article 145 that we should be discussing about. I mean, and the shift has been greatly, this in these negotiations, we had Malta, we had Austria, we had Guatemala and Honduras bring the subject up of precautionary pause and moratorium on the line, which is their main differences there. Specifically in the moratorium, basically what it wants is just so we can say no, independent of the regulations for 10, 15 years. But the precautionary pause is basically in regards to the regulations, which say on one part, let's not approve any plan of work any company, because as you guys may have known already, the metals company, for example, is planning already on submitting a plan of work by the end of this year. So the precautionary pause, actually what it wants is says that let's not approve or review a plan of work until regulations are set. But then on another step, most of the countries are saying actually we should not be talking about writing regulations when we don't even have enough information. So that's basically the main differences between precautionary pause and moratorium on the line. But now there are 32 countries in Latin America. It's a big block that has been on this line. We have Guatemala, Honduras, Ecuador, Panama, Costa Rica, Mexico, Chile, and even Peru, the first non-UNCLOS country to make a statement on the moratorium. Actually, Peru was next to the United States because they're both of the countries that are observers and have the same category as SOA. They're in there as observers like us, next in the table. They can bring statements, but could actually not vote and cannot. But well, the U.S. has not made a statement yet. We hope it will eventually. And this time in the assembly, had many new countries come. We had Bolivia come, which has not come in many years. Also, for example, but the GRULAC group, which was the Latin American Caribbean group, was very united. And mainly in this assembly, there were two main things, which was basically the general policy proposal. As you may know, we wanted a legal route for a general policy that talks specifically in regards to protection of the marine environment. This was proposed last year by Chile, but because it was proposed last minute, it was not included in the agenda because of the opposition of China. And now this time, we actually had the item in the agenda of the general policy proposal, but there was no consensus. There was no consensus to actually go into an informal group, because what the general policy wanted was an informal group to be created to create a proposal. Part of it, for example, was, we had many countries, the majority be in favor, but many did not approve it, like China, for example. And even Singapore asked what were the real intentions of a general policy proposal, because some people were saying that this might end up being a route of a moratorium, and many countries are completely against a moratorium because they want to finish regulations, and many countries think that this is a route for a precautionary pause that they don't want also. So even Singapore asked in their intervention, like, what are your intentions of a general policy? Tell us the truth. But no one wanted to say that's a moratorium or precautionary pause, because it might be another thing, just having a general policy of protection of the marine environment might be many different routes. It can be in regards to regulations, it can be in regards to creating the committee, it might be in regards to moratorium, it might be many things. So we wanted the discussion to be very broad in general, but it actually was not approved. This time the proposal had 9 countries involved in it. So we thought there was going to be more consensus, at least it was debated, but sadly it did not occur. Then in Latin America, the countries that we don't have yet still on board and that we think are great opposition is Argentina. Mainly Argentina. Argentina now is a country that mainly wants regulations to be finished. And the crazy thing is that we think it's because of Milei, but actually this is the same delegation that was even before Milei was in power. So it's just a line that Argentina wants, and we are going to have to strategize how we're going to be able to influence Argentina's position. We think it might be specifically in line with the markets, like doing the opposite of what China wants. And China wants deep sea mining, so we can probably convince them that they should do the opposite. But we have to evaluate how the strategy is going to work in Argentina, independent of our hub, independent of other organizations, because some strategists think that there should be a coalition in Argentina for it, but that will be very difficult for it to occur. Argentina is a very difficult country to regard to coalition-wise. But we were able to flip Mexico, for example. Mexico was a very, very complicated country to flip on the negotiations. Mexico declaring Clipperton Zone that Kyle mentioned is right in front of Mexico. So Mexico was going to be the country most benefited on ports. It was going to be benefiting on the economical terms of ports in Manzanillo port in regards to the treatment of the polymetallic nodules, the cleaning of it, the transportation of it, even the supplies for the people on the boats. So Mexico's going to benefit economically there. And a very interesting story of this is that the main negotiator of Mexico at that moment was Marcelino Miranda with Ambassador Mijares. They're both very good friends with Secretary General Michael Lodge. So they were both very, very pro regulations and very pro finishing them. But well, thanks to the work that we were able to do with SOA Mexico and the government and with other organizations, we were able to get Mexico to announce a moratorium. And they were in shock. Their own delegation was in shock when they announced that Mexico announced a moratorium. And now the Mexican delegate, Marcelino Miranda, had to step down and now works in the ISA. He doesn't work for Mexico anymore, but he now works directly with the International Seabed Authority. And actually, this was brought up during the council meeting when they were talking about the financial reports, that there was actually now a budget for Marcelino from Mexico to be working there, because and Mexico has still been very challenging. Now with the Secretary General election that we had, as congratulations to Brazil for this, for example. We had 79 votes in favor of Leticia Carvalho and 34 in favor of Secretary General Michael Lodge. But we were so worried because the opposition made it look like there was going to be a tie. It really did look like it was going to be, even Secretary General Lodge was going to win. And they made it look really well, but it was a landslide win. But there were many things that we had to do to guarantee that Leticia win. For example, there were 7 countries that were not able to vote because of their dues, because of the countries that have not been able to pay their dues. In Bolivia, for example, and Guatemala, 2 of the big countries in my region that were there, they were not able to vote because of their dues, sadly. And so, but also, we were very worried about Mexico because it was a secret vote. So even if your country wanted, let's say, Mexico came out, the ambassador of Mexico, actually the chancellor of Mexico came out with a tweet saying Mexico is going to vote for Leticia Carvalho. So we knew that Mexico wanted that, but who was going to do the voting was Mijares, and it's going to be a secret vote. And Mijares is the head of delegation still, and he's really good friends with Lodge. So we knew that even though his country, as was saying, that they were going to vote for Leticia, that it was not guaranteed. So there was some lobbying there to be able to get someone from Mexico to travel to the ISA to guarantee that actually it was going to be the will of the government that was going to be stated there. Because even if your country tells you something because the vote is secret, you can vote for something different when you're the representative there. And well, there was some information also that TMC, the metals company, was wanting to pay the dues of some African countries for them to be able to vote also for Michael Lodge. But still, well, it was a landslide win, which is very great. We know we have an oceanographer, a woman from the Global South, from our regions together in there. And I think what we have to do is we have an important role as SOA, all of us, to start helping build with Leticia. I mean, some organizations think that we should be just observers and we should just hold new Secretary General to accountability. But I think we've seen that right after the election, TMC was wanting to approach Leticia a lot. So I think our approach should be more constructive now. In regards of just looking for accountability, should be more constructive. I think we should talk with her. We should advise her. We should help her out to make sure that this new phase of the ISA is built also in a way that we are happy, in a way that we feel included. And inclusion, I mean, to finish now on this line, because I know it's 15 minutes. To finish also, there was a huge debate on underwater cultural heritage. Indigenous voices were constantly brought up to the table. But we as a youth have not been brought up to the table as much. And we think we have an equal value of also a cultural value, a value in a huge value that should be put in line with the same level as indigenous voices. So we do think we still have a long way to go, specifically on making our voices valued, making our voices not only heard, but valued and included and advocated for by the countries in the floor, and also by other observers. A lot of other NGOs have a responsibility to also guarantee and push for our voices to be included. Most of the NGOs advocate also for indigenous voices, but we think the youth voices should be in the same level as that. Because our cultural value comes with ecological concepts. We're the first generation to actually understand ecological concepts. We're the first generation to actually believe that things can be done in different ways. You know, we inherited values, forms, procedures, and routes that are very squared and did not align with coexistence of their environment. So I think we as youth, we have a way of building a new world and a new planet, not only with ecological concepts, but in a way that it will be able to live and coexist with planetary boundaries and coexist with other living beings and ecosystems. And not only that, because we as Sustainable Ocean Alliance, we're not only advocating for youth, for people under 35 years old, and advocating for a future, we're also bringing on the perspective of future generations. I mean, how can we guarantee that generations 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, inherit an ocean healthy or healthier than the one we inherited? So I think we have a very, very important voice to bring that we need to be giving a value for, and we need to continue to advocate for. Thank you, Brina.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing also your experience at the SA and for representing the youth voices there, being the first youth organization. This is just such a power and a step up from the access we had a few years ago. So it's quite impressive progress for sure. Well, I have a few more questions, but for this one, I think you can try to keep it brief. So the first one actually is for Kyle, if you are still there, Kyle.
I'm here.
There was a recent study released lately about the oxygen production of these polymetallic nodules that we are talking so much about, right? And as Milo just mentioned, there's most of the contracts for exploration are around those polymetallic nodules. And now we found out, well, maybe they produce oxygen. It's quite major. If you could just briefly tell us a little bit the importance of this study and what does it change in relation to what we knew before?
Yeah, so I guess that's actually something that I forgot to mention. This new study of dark oxygen, and is quite a revelation because it changes the way that we think about how the world works. So essentially, what was found, it was a study by Andrew Sweetman et al. They essentially found, it's quite technical, but they found that polymetallic nodules are actually producing oxygen. It's something that they've been monitoring for years, just to make sure that what they were seeing, what they were finding was actually conclusive, and it wasn't like a malfunction of their equipment. But yes, essentially polymetallic nodules also produce oxygen. And typically we think that oxygen production just comes from plants and sunlight, but no, it can be found in the deep depths and darkness of the ocean as well. So that changes the way we think our planet works, and also how life on, possible life on other planets can come to being as well. So it just follows to the theme of that there's so much more that we don't know about the ocean, and the fact that more research needs to be done. So yeah. I don't know if Daniel can add a bit more, but I don't know if Daniel can add a bit more, anything that I might have missed out, but
I'll go back to you with another question in a bit. And Myla, as we just talked as well, so there was a little bit of a change recently in the Brazilian presidency or the Secretary General of the ISA. Do you have any knowledge, or what do you expect from this new Brazilian Leticia coming? Can we see any changes in there, or what does this bring?
Thanks, Marina. Yeah, actually, I see this election of Leticia. I see it very optimistically, not only because she's Brazilian, but I guess, as Daniel mentioned also during his talk, there was a lot of issues with the previous Secretary General, and this is not only this is actually, I think within his mandate he went like a few steps further of what is actually the function of a Secretary General within the ISA. So I guess the optimism with Leticia's election is that we can actually restore the functions of a Secretary General, and it actually could have how the discussions can actually be brought to what they are supposed to be. And I think a little bit on her speech, or what she is kind of committing to bring to the table, I think these are very important aspects to this kind of renewal that we need in our governance processes and institutions. So she speaks a lot about participation, transparency, integration, collaboration. I think these are very important aspects that have not been the case for I would say the last perhaps even bigger, like 4 years or maybe more. But I think these are very good signs on how we can actually move forward with these discussions. And I think this can kind of exclude any noises or needs for rush and everything like that we've been feeling in the past year. So I see with good optimism that she can actually restore the functions of the Secretary General, and perhaps open more the channels of the ISA to conversation with other institutions and actors. So.
Well, thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing what comes from it, but very glad to hear that the tone is of optimism for sure. And a question for Daniel. So talking a little bit about this open, changing a little bit to a more open approach and more inclusivity, how are the youth interventions being perceived? Although SOA has an observer status, if I'm not mistaken, you have been doing some interventions and comments of the different texts coming out. How is this being perceived? Because we had actually on the previous panel on governance, we had a lot of discussions around the youth voices sometimes are there, but they are not treated on the same level. It's not equally perceived on the negotiations. So what is your perception on this?
Oh, that is a very, very good question, Marina. And I think also it's, I mean, we're talking about this. We are part of a coalition, as a Sustainable Ocean Line, which is Deep Sea Conservation Coalition. And I think more than how our interventions are being felt in the floor, is more about how our interventions are felt within the coalition. Sometimes that's the thing that has been the biggest subject, has been touching this with other organizations. I mean, from one side in the floor, we have countries telling us, you observers, you guys need to talk more in regards on the line of the regulations, because if you guys are here, you guys need to also make comments about what's going on. And then on the same time, we're part of a coalition where the strategy is like, let's not give comments in regards to the regulations, because we don't want to make regulations better. We don't want to make regulations better because we don't want that to be accepted and approved. This is common knowledge but also, and then so in the line also, what should we only be talking about is precautionary pause and moratorium, and that's like the line. I mean, we should only talk about precautionary pause and moratorium, and then at the same time, in the floor, countries are telling us, you guys are being so repetitive, you guys are saying the same things, you guys, there needs to be a diversified of voices, specifically of youth voices. So we are trying to also make our voice sound and be valued and have its own niche, so it doesn't drown out the message, but at the same time try not to hit with the coalition or make problems with the coalition internally. So we have done this. First we made 3 interventions the first week when we were at the council meeting, but we got in trouble for making 3 interventions. We thought it was important to make them known. We were very short they were less than a minute long, and we got in trouble because we should not be commenting much on it. So, but at the same time, there's been like a very differential approach to indigenous voices, which is the reason I brought this up. I mean, like, we have, every time we made an intervention, we have been asked to to put our interventions on the document, to share them, to make sure they're reviewed, to make sure they're seen. But the same has not happened with other organizations on that line. We're being policed about everything on it. So I think most of our interventions now should not all go to the floor, but also we should go between our own coalition building strategy, because I think we need to tell them and share it with our coalition that the youth voices are valued and shouldn't be policed around as much also. I mean, and that's why I think not only do we have a lot to bring like indigenous voices that are they're just as important as our voices. And I think a lot of times between our organizations, we have romanticized some groups. We're forgetting our value. We have romanticized some groups, but we forget, and we don't defend our voice. I think if we really are going to be defending voices of others, we also need to defend our voices that are just as important.
Oh, thank you so much. That was very insightful into the process, and I guess it adds even another layer of complexity on the challenges of this.
Yeah, we ended up not making any more interventions. You know, we had to silence our voice for most of the week of the meetings to prevent issues. And we just gave one opening intervention in the assembly, and that was it towards the end, for example. Yeah.
That is quite sad, is that we have a saying in Brazil, sometimes you give 2 steps forward, 1 back, right? And it feels a bit like this, but hopefully the direction is still upwards. But there is a lot of work to be done for sure. And now as a final question that is general for all of you, so I guess we can just go in the order of the table. That is, keeping in mind that we want to give a clear recommendation here, what a group of stakeholders or what D20 governments should be looking at. What do we want as an action for them to do? So if you could ask one thing for any stakeholder group, what would that be in relation to Gypsy Batman?
That's to who? Sorry.
It is for all of you, actually, but we can
Okay.
maybe go in order. Do you want to go first, Kyle? But it's open, actually.
Yeah, sure. I think the number one priority should be awareness, especially for like small and developing states that aren't really like represented at these meetings. Like the deep sea is typically seen as an area that is out of sight and out of mind. You know, people don't really give much thought to it. But it's important to point out that most of, let's say, because I can speak from like a Caribbean perspective, most of our exclusive economic zones, our ocean spaces, are deep sea. Like Barbados, for example, 99.8% of our EEZ is deep sea. So just to point out that to them that this environment is a whole lot closer to them than they know, and that like the implications of this activity is global and it's going to affect us no matter where we are, no matter where it happens. So I think awareness and education should be like top priority going forward. So I think that's my recommendation.
That's perfect. Thank you. Myla?
Thanks. Yeah, I think, I mean, coming from this perspective of reflecting a little bit on what best practices can look like, I think my main recommendation would be really the need of revisiting governance processes and instruments and ensure that we have best available practices in place. And by that, I will be, of course, speaking from the EBM sort of perspective that I think we need to look at things more holistically and making sure that we are addressing all the angles needed in a transparent way, in a communicative way. And I guess that also talks to Kyle's oh, you missed me?
I can hear you, Milo.
Yeah? Okay, cool.
Oh, now it's back. I think my internet stopped for a second there.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, so
So I
basically,
stopped at the holistic approach.
yeah, correct. Yeah, basically then making sure that we are looking into things from different angles, from a social, economic, environmental sort of perspective, and ensuring that we are bringing the different voices, including traditional voices, and including popping up outside of our bubble and making sure that we have a broader understanding, awareness from society on what's going on the deep sea. And I think the final thing would be that we should take this next years really as an opportunity to make sure that we are harmonizing the different regimes that are taking place now in the high seas and the area sort of a thing, so that we can harmonize practices to make sure that we are actually everyone is actually going towards the same direction and the same objectives in terms of conserving the ocean and marine biodiversity and so on. So I would say coherence, harmonization, and holistic practices towards governance and management. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Daniel?
Ooh, I think besides awareness and the evidence-based management, I think what we need to be firm is also our approach, but I think our vision in long term as intergenerational vision, which is how are we going to maintain the services that the ocean has already provided? As you know, so like our UNCLOS, the UNCLOS wording is basically the common heritage of humankind, which this came under Maltan ambassador in the 60s. Like the common heritage was a. So in that line, I mean, basically when Secretary Lodge, for example, talks about how they're gonna benefit humanity, gonna open the ocean for the benefit of humanity, I think our line should be that the ocean has already been benefiting for billions of years and will continue to benefit us all for millions of years more if we just let it be. So I think it should be the view of future generations and intergenerational value, and also not only for humankind. I think we also as a generation, we are the first generation to understand we are not a divine species, you know. We're not a God-made like species. We're one more animal in this living kingdom. And if we don't view ourselves like that, if we start romanticizing our own image of species, we're not going to be able to really coexist with the planet. I think we are, we as a species, you know, we are 8 billion people in the planet right now. And 200 years ago, we were 1 billion people. 10,000 years ago, we were 1 million people. You know, we are a species that also lives under planetary limits, under carrying capacity, under ecological rules. And we need to control ourselves. You know, this activity has not occurred. The ocean ecosystem has not adapted with our extractivism, commercial extractivism activities. So I think we should be focusing on how we're going to give the ocean for the next generations is by letting it be, and by not only thinking about humankind, but actually thinking about all kinds of species with us.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing so much knowledge and also great insights and recommendations. It has been an immense pleasure having you all here with us. And I think it's an amazing way to wrap up these ocean dialogues. And let's hope that our voices are heard once again and that we can enact some change in this global scale, as it is such a global problem. Thank you so much for you all.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Thank you, Marla and Kyle.
And
Thank you,
sorry,
Marina.
just
Thank
one
you.
second. Amanda, would you like also to take a picture out together as we did for the other ones?
We can finish.
No, I think
And-
we are
okay.
done.